We take for granted the beauty of the everyday, the specialness of the everyday, how lucky we are just to have a moment. And you shouldn't have to wait until your life is in peril to appreciate that.
Appreciate that. My name is Jim Farley, and this is Drive. My next guest is a famous author, Mitch Albom. He wrote Tuesdays with Morrie and 5 People You Meet in Heaven. He's a Detroiter's Detroiter, and he's a self-proclaimed bad driver. Mitch, you're a well-known sports columnist for the Detroit Free Press, and I wanted to start today with a column you wrote back in 2014. It's called Why I Don't and Should Never Cruise. I love this article. It was so, snarky and self-aware all at the same time. And so tell us about that, because you're such an accomplished person to come out, and you're a Motown guy after all these years, and everyone associates you, and you've done so much good in the community, and yet you're so clearly critical of your own driving skills. What happened there?
If I had $100 for every car I've cracked up over the course of my life, I'd actually have a substantial sum of money. And you'd think, well, how many cars did you own? But I'm not talking about cars I own. I'm talking about rental cars. I remember I took a trip to Europe once back in the 80s when I was covering winter sports, and I drove all around. I was covering freelance winter sports, so I went to like ski jumping and
Yep.
downhill skiing.
Yep.
So I was driving around Val d'Isère, France,
Yep.
and parts of Austria and parts of Germany, mountain towns,
Yep.
whatever. I destroyed 3 rental cars on that trip. On one trip, three rental cars I wrecked, including one taking out of the Winter Olympics in Sarajevo, where I fell asleep, banged into a wall, and the axle came off the car, and it just dropped in the middle of the road, and it was outside Dubrovnik, and I had to call someone from an airport for 2 hours to come in the 4 o'clock in the morning, and he took one look at the rental car. He said, we just left it there, just left it in the middle of the road. I just destroyed the thing. And he took me all the way back to the airport, got me another rental car. So I have left carcasses of rental cars. I even one time took a rental car in Orlando, Florida, took my nephews to spring training, and we pulled up to the airport, and I opened the door and let my nephews out, and we would get that. I forgot to close the door.
Yes.
Because I'm absent-minded.
Yeah.
And a rent-a-car bus came around and just knocked the door, right, just went flying and off of the car. And I said, that's going to be tough to return to the rental car. But we did. We put the door in the back seat, drove it to the rental car place, and said, you're probably going to want to charge me for this, but I've got to make a plane, got to go. So I have learned, don't trust myself in a car. I'm not a good driver. You should know your strengths, but more importantly, you should know your weaknesses.
So did you ever get canceled by any of the rental car companies?
Yeah, I do remember Hertz kind of said, no thanks, we don't really want you in our gold membership club for a stretch of time. And I on the other hand, I've helped their finances tremendously because I've paid a lot of bills over time. Yeah.
Some would say that you've been able to see your profession, change quite a bit. The Ted Koppels, 60 Minutes, the Dick Schaps, the ultimate kind of professionals in journalism, and then, things have changed a lot. What's your perspective on your profession and how it's changed over the years, and what are your reflections to the rest of us?
Well, I worry for the media, to be honest. I feel that the media has gone from when I got into it, which was right after sort of the throes of Woodward and Bernstein, and
Yes.
a lot of people were getting into journalism after Watergate and all the president's men, and it seemed like a place where you could do hard work and stand up for the little guy and uncover truths that were important for the public to know. And now it just seems like the priorities of people who are getting into it, young people, are, one, to be famous, to be well known, to have their name associated with their reporting, not the other way around. to be known for who they are, not what, how they write or what the reporting is, which was not the way that we were taught. I mean, when I came up here, we were taught, like what's important is the work that you do. And
Yeah.
I appeared in the New York Times without my byline. My name wasn't even on it. It was just, I was proud of it because I wrote the story. I knew I wrote the story, and it was a good story about, something in sports that I wanted people to know. Now, no one would even think of doing something if their name wasn't the first thing on it. And very few people are going into print, or they all want to be in a broadcast journalism because they want their face associated with it. And most importantly, or sadly, they want to come out spewing opinions, and they want to just come out and screaming, and they all want to be Stephen A. Smith, but they want to be Stephen A. Smith at age 22. And that's, you have to have gone through some things before you have opinions on it. I know, because I was a young columnist, very young, and there were times I look back on it where I was writing, and a columnist is hired for his opinion, not just to report. And I remember looking back on things that I opined on when I was in 27 and 28 and 30, that I look back now and I go, you had no right to be making statements like that. You didn't, you weren't wise enough.
Yes.
There are times even at my age now that I still feel like, well, I haven't experienced what that person experienced. I can't come out and be critical of them, in a dismissive way. And I think the media world needs to do a big self-examination on who it is and where it's going.
In that vein, I wanted to ask about Tuesdays with Morrie, and we're all older, and the world has become so uncivil in a way, and yet the older people in our lives seem to have that wisdom that you were talking about, that seems more important maybe than it ever was before. And your book had such a big impact on so many people, given where you see things today in America. Does the meaning of that book, or the meaning of that wisdom, have changed?
Well, I would say that Morrie's wisdom and the things that Tuesdays with Morrie kind of spoke to are more important today than ever. And the book remains extremely popular. I mean, it's kind of a different popularity. It sells lots of copies every year. I mean, lots and lots of copies every year, but it's also used in school systems, and it's used in churches, and it's used in funeral parlors, and it's used in medical school programs, and it's used in hospice programs, whatever. So I'll find out that book is found its way into all kinds of corners, and not just in America, all over the world. It's translated into well over 50 languages. And so I'm never surprised anymore when people come up and say, oh, we studied your book in a medical ethics class in medical school, or we give your book out to everyone who comes into our funeral parlor, or we give. And I long ago, Jim, separated myself from that book. I mean, Tuesdays with Morrie was an accident.
What do you mean by that when you say you separated yourself?
Well, I don't ever think that it's because of my writing, that I had that people bought that book. When people compliment Tuesdays with Morrie, to me, they're what they're complimenting is Morrie's wisdom and Morrie's take on life. And I was just the lucky person to write it down. I don't let the millions and millions of copies that it sold, go to my head like, oh, I'm the reason that it sold those millions of copies. So, everything I'm going to touch is going to be like that. I never was like that, because the book from the beginning, as I say, was an accident. I only went to visit Morrie by accident myself, because I had lost touch with him. After 16 years, he had been such a close professor of mine while I was in college. I majored in sociology because of him. And I promised him I would stay in touch when I graduated, and then I broke that promise every day and week and month and year for 16 years, because I was so enthralled with my own career, my own ambition, and my own, all those things you were talking about in the 80s and 90s. I was everywhere, and I was on TV, and I'm writing a column, and I'm doing radio, and I just was too busy to be bothered to keep up with him. And then I found out that he was dying from Lou Gehrig's disease. And so I went to visit him once. I thought it would be, like a one-time visit, feel sorry for you, sorry. But I was so kind of taken in by his contentment, and the way that he was dying, and the way that he didn't seem to be scared, and didn't seem to be, regretful of how he lived his life. And I was 37 at the time and was really in the vortex of all that stuff going on, but wasn't particularly happy. I was busy,
Yep.
but I wasn't happy. And I started to go back, and I went back the next Tuesday and the next Tuesday and the next Tuesday. I ended up going every Tuesday that he had left in his life to find out what he knew that I didn't know. And, what do you know when you're really dying that puts everything else into perspective, and wouldn't it be great to have that perspective when you're young enough or healthy enough to do something about it? But it was never supposed to be a book. I didn't go there to write a book. I went to spend time with my old professor. It became a book when he told me that he was in debt for his medical expenses and that he couldn't afford to pay it, and he had no means to. So I went out to try to find a publisher to say, hey, would you be interested in the book on this experience, just to help him pay his bills? And we got turned down everywhere.
Oh, really?
Every single place we went to, not interested, boring. You're a sports writer. It's about death. Nobody wants to read it. And we only found one publisher only a few weeks before he died that was even interested in doing it. They gave me just enough money to pay his bills. I gave him all the money to pay his bills. And that was supposed to be it. So from the very beginning, it wasn't supposed to be a successful book. It wasn't supposed to reach people, whatever. It was a way of paying his bills. And so I wrote this very small book. I wrote it as simply as I could. I'd never written a book like that. All my books were about sports up to that point, and suddenly here I'm writing a book that's got nothing to do with sports. I had no idea if I was doing it well or right or wrong. And when it came out, they printed 20,000 total copies for the whole world. And I thought I'd have them in the trunk of my car for the rest of my life, and I'd be giving them out to people when they walk past. So for it to go from that to the most read memoir in the history of publishing is not something that anybody anticipates. And, it's something that Morrie said, something that his decency about what's really important in life, that still rings true today, 27 years after the book came out. It absolutely rings true today. All the things that he said about family, about forgiveness, about money, about the culture, they absolutely ring true today, maybe more today than even back then. And so I think that's why people continue to study it or read it. And I think that's why we continue to need it.
And you said that maybe it's twice. You said maybe we need it more than ever. What about Morrie? Perspective, contentment, satisfaction with life, acceptance, his wisdom, should we listen to right now?
Well, one of his favorite quotes was from a poet named W.H. Auden, and the quote was, "We must love each other or perish." And, it's a very simple sentence, but basically, as Morrie interpreted it, was if we don't put each other ahead of our money, our politics, our anger, then we will die. We will wipe each other out. And we've seen the tendencies that we're having right now. I mean, look at the world, look at how many pockets of the world are at each other's throats. And even in the United States, while we're not warring with weapons, we are certainly at each other's throats.
Yes. There's so much to talk about on this topic, but my closest friend, when I got to Michigan, I didn't know anyone. He got prostate cancer and died over the course of several years. But and he was such a thoughtful person. And I remember at the very end, we all knew he was going to die. I asked him, "What are you going to miss?" And we felt comfortable enough in our friendship to have that conversation. He said, "I'm going to miss just the normal things of daily life." It was such a stark comment. Wow.
Yep.
You mean all the things that I rush through the day waiting for something exciting to happen, like the Lions to win, and really what I'll miss the most is just having dinner with my family.
Yeah.
I thought that was so helpful.
Yeah.
So helpful.
I had a moment like that with Morrie where I asked him if you could be healthy again for 24 hours.
Yes.
Perfectly healthy, what would you do? And he said, oh, well, and he started in the morning. He said, I'd get up, I'd have this lovely breakfast with my wife, and then I'd go for a walk, and And I'd meet with my friends, and we'd read, and we'd do this, and then we'd maybe go to dinner, and then I would go dancing, and then I'd fall into a beautiful sleep. And I said, that's such an ordinary day. You could have done that any day of your life. He said, that's the point. And, that's exactly what you were just intimating too, that we take for granted the beauty of the everyday, the specialness of the everyday, how lucky we are just to have a moment. And, you shouldn't have to wait until your life is in peril to appreciate that.
To appreciate that, yeah. You've written a lot about heaven. You've written a lot about the kind of the end of things kind of being very beautiful and wonderful. And I was wondering where that came from, or is that just literally just the randomness of meeting people, or is there's got to be some perspective you have, because it's a theme in a lot of your writing.
It's a theme, but sometimes it's a misunderstood theme that people, who give me a quick glance or a quick summary say, oh, he always writes about death. And I always object to that, because they say, no, I don't write about death. People who write about serial killers and murder mysteries, they write about death.
Yes.
I write about life.
Yes.
I use death, or I use heaven, to try to talk about life. So the book that kind of is a signature of what you're talking about for me is The 5 People You Meet in Heaven,
yes,
which was my first novel.
Yes.
So the conceit of The 5 People You Meet in Heaven is that a guy dies trying to save a little girl at an amusement park, and he tries to push her out of the way from a falling ride, and the ride smashes down on him, and he doesn't remember what happened, and he lands in heaven, and he finds out that heaven, the first stage, is you meet 5 people from your life, each of whom was in your life maybe for an instant,
yes,
maybe for years, maybe for an instant, but in some way you changed them and they changed you forever. And he finds out, he keeps asking, did I save the girl? Did I save the girl? Did I save the girl? And he only finds that out at the very end. But along the way, he finds out that he had all this impact,
yes,
on people that he didn't realize. So everyone thought I was writing a book about heaven, and he's spiritual, he's religious, he's writing about heaven, but I wasn't. I wrote the book because I had an uncle who thought that he was nobody. And he would always say to me, I'm a nobody, I'm a nothing, I'm nobody. And I wanted to write a story that showed that there's no such thing as a nobody. So this particular uncle, who was a World War II veteran and a kind of a pop-eyed kind of guy, I talk like this, and he told me a story once about how he died during an operation, technically, a heart operation, and they lost him for a few seconds or whatever. You know how they say someone's died, they had to resuscitate him.
Yes.
And he said that he remembered rising out of his body,
which is if you read, I read a lot about this topic, is a very common experience.
Yes. But in his case, he said he rose out of his body, he looked down, he saw them working on him, but then he saw on the edge of the bed, all of his dead relatives.
I see.
Were waiting for him.
Yes.
And I joked with him. I said, well, what'd you say to them? And I said, get the hell out of here. I'm not ready for any of you yet. And apparently he scared them right back to heaven. He went back into his body, and he lived another 10 years. So I use that idea that there are people waiting for you when you die. But I said, but what if they're not your relatives? What if maybe one of them's your relative, or 2 of them, but maybe some of them are just people like, I always think you'll appreciate this because you're a car guy. How many times have you been on the road? Your mind drifts, you got your hand on the wheel, your mind drifts, you start into the other lane, you're not aware of it.
Yeah.
And you hear a horn honk,
Yes.
and pull your wheel back and you get back in your lane, you didn't realize you were about to hit somebody.
Yes.
And that person drives past you, maybe they give you the finger, something like that. They go past you. That person may have just saved your life.
Yes.
You have no idea who they are. You don't know their name. You'll never meet them again. But they may have just saved your life. Now, what's more important than saving a life? So we interact with people that way, and we don't even realize it. So I wanted to write a book about, how there's no such thing as a nobody. Everybody means something to somebody. So I used that device of heaven to have people, because when else would you find out what you meant in your life than at the end of it?
Yeah.
So he goes to heaven, he meets all these people, and they say, you mattered, you did matter, you did matter, you did matter. But then the book comes out and everybody thinks, oh, he just wants to write about heaven. And no, the whole point of that book was just for people who feel like they're nobodies. I just used heaven as an example. So sometimes people think I'm a little more caught up in dying or death, and it's not. I just find that I get people's attention that way. If I say, okay, you're about to die, oh, listen, okay, now pay attention to me because I'm gonna,
you're honking at people.
I'm honking, right.
Yeah, I find that so helpful to get to understand that about your writing. In my position, I've met all sorts of kinds of people, and I remember going to one really fancy guy's funeral who was a big business leader, and there was like 10 people there, and his family wasn't even there. And then about a week later, I wound up going to my uncle's funeral in Grosse Pointe, and some people could say he was, unrememberable or unremarkable. And the church was filled with 400 people.
Wow.
And every one of them had the story like you just said. And it was very simple stuff. Your uncle, and because of my job, people want to come up and say, hey, I want to tell you about your uncle. And I like, so who was the richer person?
Right.
To your point. That's so wonderful and so important for us to remember. And so another question that's obvious today about things that are kind of different than it was, like, what's your perspective on college sports changing? And because you've seen the whole thing from start to finish.
I have, and honestly, I find it very repulsive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they should just do away with the word college sports.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't college sports. It's a adjunct organization that is, wears the name of the school.
Yep.
But at least at the football level.
Yes.
Because it starts to shrink at basketball. It definitely shrinks by baseball. And once you're down onto softball or gymnastics, it's much, much different.
Yep.
So what the old system wasn't great, because it wasn't that getting a scholarship and getting a scholarship and getting free room and board and meals and everything and a chance to play on a football team, that should be enough of a thing. That should be enough for a player to want to go.
Especially from a good school, right?
If it's a good school, I would have liked to have had my tuition paid for and played on a great sports team, and I would have considered that a fair deal. When it stopped becoming a fair deal is when the schools started making billions of dollars off of these sports.
Yeah.
Then the athletes had a right to say, well, wait a minute.
We're
the ones going out there and playing. We're the ones taking chances with our health. Some of us are going to get injured and ruin our career, not going to have a professional career. And billions are coming in, and we can't buy a hamburger without violating the rules, or we can't, that's wrong. And that was wrong too.
Yes.
But now they have overcorrected
I see.
to the point where you are paying guys who haven't even gotten there yet.
Correct.
The same thing that was illegal. The same thing, the same principle was, if you give Chris Webber a hamburger to get him to come to your school, you violated the rules. That exact concept is now exactly what they do. We're going to give you $10 million to come to our school. That's insane. A kid hasn't even played yet. And what does that say to the backup offensive lineman who has to block for him? Well, hi, how about you share some of your $10 million, or I'll just let this guy go around me and he can snack you.
Yeah.
So it's taken all the balance out of things. It's over the top correction. And I think college sports has lost its way. I think it's just become a minor league football
for the professional.
It's a minor league for the professionals, but it's not even minor anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, in minor league baseball, you got guys making $60,000-$70,000 a year. They're not making $10 million a year. So I don't know how you fix it short of just throwing out the system and just creating a league, because a lot of the players.
Yeah, there may be schools that just do that. They say, we're going to go back to where it was, and we're going to join a different kind of, league, and that'll be interesting. One of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you was that everywhere I go in Detroit, and work on this charity or that charity, because that's how I was taught, your name comes up, like in every single area. You have charities, as you said, for Haiti. You do so much for the city of Detroit, so much for people. Where does that come from?
Well, two areas, Jim. One, I was raised that way with my own family, and my parents didn't have a lot, but they were always sharing with other people, and they always were kind of the people who took care of the other members of their family. So if they needed help or someone else in the family needed help, my father was the person that they came to, and he never blinked. I mean, he never blinked. And I would sometimes say, "How come you're always the one that they ask?" And he said, "Some people were just put in that position, and you have to just do it, and you don't complain about it." And the second influence was Morrie, who said to me, he said to me at one point, "What do you do for charities? What do you do for your community?" That was the question. And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, how do you help out in your community, charities, things like that?" I said, "I write checks." And he said, "Well, anybody can write a check, but you've been given a gift. You have a voice that is being heard in your community, and you need to use that voice to do more than just aggrandize yourself." I always remember that because nobody uses the word aggrandize except the college professor. And I felt very guilty about what he had said when I thought about it. And that was the year I started my first charity in Detroit. It's called the Dream Fund, which was a scholarship fund for kids to study at the College for Creative Studies. And since then, one thing has led to another and another. I formed Say Detroit. Say Detroit has grown into a multi-million-dollar operation. It's got 9 separate charities underneath it. It deals with homelessness. It deals with medical clinics. It deals with rec centers for kids after school, and veterans and seniors, and many, many other things. And then, of course, there's Haiti, which I go to every month, an orphanage that I operate in. And honestly, Morrie had an expression, "Giving is living and taking is dying." And he told me that because he said, when I would say to him, "How come when people come here, they come here to kind of, feel sorry for you, entertain you, do, and you end up like talking to them and asking them about their problems and their love life and their divorce and their job and you end up giving them advice, and it's like they're coming for a therapy session." And I said, "But you're the one who's dying." And he said, "Well, why would I take from people, Mitch? Taking just makes me feel like I'm dying. Giving makes me feel like I'm living." And I watched that happen, Jim, and I said, wow, like if when you're dying, what makes you feel most alive is giving to other people, then that has to be true for when you're healthy. And I find it is. I never sleep as well as when I'm in Haiti, even though I'm sleeping on a crap mattress, on a lousy bed in the heat, with mosquitoes flying around. But I know that I'm doing something that matters. I know the kids are happy that I'm there and feel more safe and secure, and I'm able to help them more when I'm there, and I get up in the morning anxious to go just help. And it has nothing to do with, nobody knows and nobody hears about it, and it's not reported, and it's not on TV, and it's not in the newspaper, and it's not anything that other than you and me talking about it right now, anybody even knows about it. But I feel vital, I feel like my life matters, and I've been very blessed to have that. So, I don't plan on stopping any of that anytime soon.
Wow. And how, have similar experience of volunteering in India, and the gift, everyone was like, "Well, that was great, but can it make a difference?" But the gift was really to myself, not to be selfish about it, just to kind of, and it's hard to find the capacity to thank the people that open that door for giving, because they tend to be people that don't really need anything, but they do it by example, as you said. Well, thank you for everything you do for our community. Thank you for everything you do with your voice. I have to say that because Detroit's a much stronger city now than when you found it, when you came here all those years ago. But we have a lot more work to do, and and it'll never be finished. And that's just part of what you do is here in Detroit. But we're all inspired by you and are thankful for for your example. I guess I just end with the same question I ask all my fantastic guests like you. What advice would you give the head of Ford Motor Company?
Be good to people. Same advice that I would give to anybody. You know, doesn't matter if you're head of Ford or the guy living next door. You know, just put yourself in the other person's position and think about that before you make any decisions, and then let your conscience be your guide, like Jiminy Cricket sang. You know, rest is pretty simple.
That's great advice. And for people in leadership like myself, it's easy to get knocked off course in the name of XYZ stakeholder. It's easy to get knocked off course about what's important and what's not. So I appreciate that. It comes at an important time as we make a big transition in our society to lower carbon vehicles, and you know, we have the largest employer in any auto company in the U.S. because we bet on the U.S. And a lot of people would say that wasn't smart. We could make a lot more money. But I know. Thank you for reminding me that, you know, it's important not to get knocked off course. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate everything you do. I learned so much from you today.
Well, I learned a lot from you here too, Jim, and it's a pleasure to get to talk to you. And I wish, you know, everybody could have the opportunity to spend 45 minutes or an hour with one another, just alone. You know, I always thought the world would be a better place if we just paired everybody off every day, and that you had to eat lunch with somebody new every single day of your life. Think about how much you would learn about other people's perspectives if you weren't just surrounding yourself with the same people all the time, but you had to get to know somebody. So I'm glad that this circumstance let me get to know you a little bit. And now I feel like I know you better and understand Ford better too. So thank you for the education too, and all of your listeners and viewers.